Good evening. Laskavo prosimo. Welcome. My name is Marisa Kazmarzik. I'm the Director of Client Services at the New Canadian Centre. I'd like to just let you know first that we are recording this session. So you will see that there's a record on the top and it will be available afterwards if anyone would like to view the session again. Thank you all for coming to this session on pathways to permanent residence in Canada. Before we start, I would like to respectfully acknowledge that we are on the treaty and traditional territory of the Michisagi and Anishinaabe. We offer our gratitude to the First Peoples for their care for and teachings about our earth and our relations. May we always honor these teachings. Tonight's session is intended to provide an overview of the options to become a permanent resident for Ukrainians who have come to Canada through the Canada-Ukraine Authorization for Emergency Travel Program. And I'm going to ask Olena Stepa, the NCC Ukrainian Community Liaison, to please interpret for me in these first introductory remarks.
Thanks, Marisa.
Yeah. Do you want to just give a little bit of an overview of what I've said so far?
Sure. Доброго вечора всім. Дуже дякую, що ви до нас приєдналися. Сьогодні з нами Мариса і також представники імміграційної служби Ерин і Ребека. І ми сьогодні записуємо цю зустріч і також відзначаємо, що ми знаходимося на території і місцевих indigenous people, і дякуємо їм за те, що вони піклуються про ці землі з нами. Go ahead, Marisa.
Thank you. So our two speakers tonight will provide the presentation in English, and we will show the slides in Ukrainian. We'll also post the slides in English in the chat for those who would prefer to look at the English slides. Olena?
Ви побачите слайди сьогодні в чаті, ви знайдете їх англійською мовою, але для вас сьогодні ми презентуємо їх українською мовою. Якщо у вас якісь питання, то, будь ласка, придержіть їх до кінця, і потім я допоможу перекласти і відповісти на ці запитання. Marisa?
After the presentation, the speakers will take questions in English or in Ukrainian, and Olena will continue to provide interpretation for us.
І ще раз, питання можна задавати українською чи англійською мовою, і, як завжди, я допоможу перекласти. Marisa?
As this is an overview of the topic, the speakers tonight will not be able to comment on individual cases, but we hope that we will provide you with some new information to help you to plan for your future here in Canada. If you do have questions related to your specific situation, we invite you to contact the speakers after tonight's presentation or contact NCC or other immigration specialists in our area.
Зауважимо, що сьогодні наша зустріч сконцентрована на поняттях, які начальні про імміграцію. Тобто ми попросимо вас, будь ласка, не углублюватись в ваші деталі специфічні, бо це приватна інформація, а сьогоднішня сесія, вона записується. Якщо у вас є питання по вашій ситуації, будь ласка, звертайтеся до нас в Центр нових канадців або звертайтеся до наших презентаторів сьогодні. Ви завжди можете звернутися до мене, я можу допомогти вам з контактами і куди звернутися. Marisa?
I'd like to just take a minute to introduce our two speakers, and then we'll get to the slideshow. Rebecca Tripp is licensed as a paralegal by the Law Society of Ontario and is a regulated Canadian immigration consultant.
Презентуємо до вас сьогодні наших гостей. Ребека, вона з нами, лицензірований спеціаліст і консультант по міграційним справам.
She's based not far from Peterborough and is the founder and principal of the Immigration and Paralegal Law Office of Rebecca B. Tripp.
Вона знаходиться, Ребека, її офіс недалеко від Пітербору, і в неї є своя контора.
She is also the creator and host of the Applicant podcast, releasing weekly episodes about her three passions: education, immigration, and law.
Також у Ребеки є свій подкаст, в якому вона обсуждає деякі свої найулюбленіші справи. Це освіта і також право. Будь ласка, знайдіть його на подкастах в Apple або інших платформах.
And our other speaker is Erin O'Rourke. She is an immigration and employment lawyer at Erin O'Rourke Law in St. Catharines, Ontario.
А наш наступна гостя – це Ерін О'Рурк. Вона знаходиться в місті Сент-Катрінс, і вона є адвокат іммігрантської справи.
She's a lifelong advocate of improving access to justice and prides herself on providing fair and competent legal advice and representation.
Ерін завжди, для неї важливо надати пораду, яка є справедлива, і вона за всі свої роки праці цього і добивається.
She has a wide range of experience, but for tonight, I would highlight that she has assisted on human rights tribunal applications and employment law issues.
Ерін має дуже різноманітний досвід в своїй праці. У неї також є дуже важні моменти по правам за human rights. Це таке міжнародне term. Так, Marissa, go ahead.
And she has also worked as a social justice fellow with the United Nations High Commission for Refugees in Toronto.
Вона також працювала з Організацією Об'єднаних Націй в Торонто, займалася людьми, які являються refugees.
Both our speakers are volunteering their time tonight, and we are very appreciative that they've taken the time to put together this slide presentation and to answer questions. So welcome.
Ми також дуже дякуємо і Ребеці, і Ерін, бо вони свій час волонтерять з нами сьогодні поспілкуватися і приготували цю презентацію для всіх, для нас інформативно. Дуже вам дякуємо.
Erin, Rebecca, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Will I be sharing the slides, or is someone else going to be, you're going to share them? Okay. Okay, so okay, so Canadian Immigration 101, this is an overview. Next slide. Okay, so there are 4 different statuses when an individual is in Canada: temporary resident, permanent resident, a refugee, and a Canadian citizen. Next slide. Okay. So definitions, a temporary resident is a foreign national with permission to visit, study, and or work in Canada for a temporary period of time. A permanent resident is a foreign national who has applied and has been granted permanent status. So they are able to stay in Canada longer than a temporary resident. It must be renewed every 5 years and must be physically in Canada 2 out of every 5 years. And you may have your status revoked due to inadmissibility. A refugee, also called a refugee claimant or asylum seeker, is a foreign national who needs Canada's protection from prosecution. Still must apply for a study or work permit until permanent residence has been granted. And lastly, a citizen is a person who has the right to live in a country by virtue of birth or by legally acquiring the rights. A citizen does not need to renew their citizenship status. Next slide. So temporary resident status, an individual in Canada under the CUAET are considered temporary residents. The CUAET is not a refugee immigration stream. Therefore, there isn't one specific path, permanent residency path to follow. There are several ways for an individual to obtain permanent resident status. One way is express entry. So express entry is an online system that we use to manage immigration applications for skilled workers. There are 3 immigration programs managed through the express entry program. Canadian Experience Class, the Federal Skilled Worker Program, and the Federal Skilled Trades Program. There's the link if you want to click to learn more information on these types of programs. But essentially, Canadian Experience Class is for skilled workers who have Canadian work experience, and the work experience must have been gained in the last 3 years before you apply. The Federal Skilled Worker Program is for skilled workers with foreign work experience, and they must meet the criteria for education, and there's other factors as well. Lastly, the Federal Skilled Trades Program is for skilled workers who are qualified in a skilled trade. And again, they must have a valid, they must also have a valid job offer or certificate of qualification in order to be eligible to apply. Next slide. So permanent residency through express entry. If you are eligible for one of the express entry programs and submit a free online profile, you will be ranked in the express entry pool using the comprehensive ranking system, the CRA. The CRA is a point system that they use to assess your eligibility. To be invited, you need to have a score above the minimum point score for your round of invitations. The latest cutoff score was, here it says 500, it was actually 496 recently. You can see the latest rounds of invitations using that link, and you can roughly calculate your own CRS score using the link provided. Next slide. Okay, so processing time. From when you submit, it's approximately 17 months right now to receive a decision. Legal Aid Ontario is not available, and the government filing fees for this application are $850 for the permanent or for the principal applicant processing fee and $515 for the right of permanent residency fee. While an individual in Canada under the CUAET program can apply for temporary resident status free of charge, they do need to pay for the government filing fee for other immigration statuses, such as a permanent resident or a citizen. Erin will be taking it from here.
Okay, so the next slide is the next stream that we'll be discussing tonight, which is the Humanitarian and Compassionate Grounds application. So an individual may be eligible to apply for permanent residence under the H&C grounds if they are in Canada and need an exemption from one or more requirements of the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act, otherwise known as IRPA, or the regulations in order to apply for permanent residence within Canada. So this could be criminal inadmissibility, medical inadmissibility, anything that makes an individual inadmissible for applying through a regular stream. It is also important to have humanitarian and compassionate considerations that justify the granting of this exemption, and the individual cannot be eligible to apply for permanent residence from within Canada in a different stream, such as a spouse or common law partner, live-in caregiver, caregivers caring for children, people with high medical needs, protected persons and convention refugees, and temporary resident permit holders. So it needs to be sort of a, it's almost like a last alternative when applying for a permanent residence in Canada, or an alternative when there are one or more inadmissibilities precluding you from applying to a program like Express Entry or for refugee status. Some examples of humanitarian and compassionate ground considerations that justify the needs of granting an exemption could be the best interest of the child. That's a large consideration when assessing humanitarian and compassionate grounds. Whether you have medical needs that can only be supported in Canada, the length of time and your ties to Canada and how established you are, and whether you're able to sustain yourself or have been on any government assistance. So all of those sorts of considerations will be taken into account when assessing humanitarian and compassionate considerations. The processing time for this is approximately 22 months, and Legal Aid Ontario is available to assist individuals with these sorts of applications if you meet the threshold for the household income. So if you make under the cutoff amount, they can assist you with submitting and filing this application. However, you still need to file the government filing fees, even if Legal Aid can assist you with preparing the paperwork. So the principal applicant processing fee is $570, and the right to permanent residence fee is $515. So the next stream on the next slide is the refugee stream. And this is sort of a twofold process. As we were talking about in humanitarian and compassionate application is an application for permanent residency. Express Entry is an application for permanent residency. And applying for refugee is the first step in getting permanent residency. So first, you have to apply for refugee status through submitting a basis of claim. Your claim is then evaluated to see if it is eligible, or if you are eligible to apply for refugee status. And once the claim is deemed eligible, there will be a hearing before the Refugee Protection Division. And that is where you give evidence and explain the story of what happened to you and why you need Canada's protection. If the claim is accepted by the Refugee Protection Division, otherwise known as the RPD, the individual is then considered a protected person in Canada. Protected person status itself does not give the individual permanent residence. You still need a work or study permit if you're granted refugee status in Canada before you apply for permanent resident status. So the individual must apply for permanent resident status after being granted protected person status within Canada within 5 years of being granted that status. However, this is a more complicated stream, as if you return home while you have permanent residence as a protected person, this could revoke your protected person status and your permanent residence as a result if the government of Canada proceeds with a cessation proceeding or a cessation hearing, which means that Canada deems you no longer in need of needing protection, and therefore they take away your permanent residence. For permanent residence as a refugee, the processing times are about 24 months, and this is because it takes a while for your claim to go ahead, for your hearing to be scheduled, and then to apply for permanent residence after that. Legal Aid Ontario, again, is available to assist with individuals and families that meet the financial threshold and can assist with filing those applications. There are no fees to filing a refugee claim. However, like the Humanitarian and Compassionate Grounds application, you do still have to pay for the $570 principal applicant processing fee for applying for permanent residence. However, you are exempt from the right to permanent residence fee. So it is just the one fee that is required there. And this is just a note on inadmissibility. And inadmissibility applies to permanent residence no matter which stream you gain permanent residence through. So permanent residence is sort of a misnomer because it doesn't necessarily mean you can stay in Canada indefinitely. If an individual becomes inadmissible, for example, someone has permanent residence and commits a certain crime that gives them a sentence of more than 6 months, that could be deemed inadmissible to Canada. This could lead to a Section 44 report and an inadmissibility hearing, and an individual could be stripped of their permanent residence and deported. It is important to note that protected persons in Canada cannot be stripped of their permanent resident status as easily as of their status in Canada as easily as regular permanent residents. They can still lose their permanent resident status. However, it's very hard to remove a protected person from Canada. So they could essentially go back to the second step where they have the protected person status to remain in Canada, but do not have any permanent residence in Canada. In order to be removed from Canada as a protected person, the government needs to allege that they are either a danger to the public or that they are no longer a person in need of protection, which is what I was explaining on the last slide, which means cessation. So it's a bit more complex. It's still possible. It just adds an extra layer of protection to the protected person status. However, no matter which way you obtain your permanent resident status, once you become a Canadian citizen, this is no longer an issue. And as stated at the beginning, you do not need to renew your Canadian citizenship. It's just a status given to you. However, it is my understanding as well that this is sometimes a complex issue with dual citizenship and having to potentially give up a different citizenship in order to obtain Canadian citizenship. So that's also a consideration to take into account as well. So who can help you? So only a regulated Canadian immigration consultant or an immigration lawyer can give you legal advice. So both are able to assist you through the process. I'm an immigration lawyer, so I can assist with the same applications a consultant can assist with, but we also have the ability to go before the federal court and to bring judicial reviews of any decision that an officer may make. We can also assist with any appeals of decisions. And if you can kind of see here, this little graph of sort of, the provincial and federal courts, the lawyers can go all the way up to the Supreme Court. So I don't necessarily ever go to the Supreme Court, but technically lawyers can go all the way there and represent you throughout that process. However, immigration consultants are also regulated professionals that can also assist in a variety of different applications. And I'll let Rebecca touch a little bit more on what she can assist with as well.
Yes, thank you. So as Erin was saying, this whole court system map chart, we'll call it, a lawyer can help you at any stage, at any level. An immigration consultant can only help you in that red box. So the federal administrative tribunals, which include the IRB is the Immigration Refugee Board, and that's where our representation stops. So we can only help you in that area, which with immigration law and with many of you, that's really all you need. But it's good to understand the difference between a lawyer and an immigration consultant. We both have governing bodies. We both pay annual fees, but an immigration lawyer completed law school and passed the bar exam, where immigration consultants have not attended law school. Therefore, they're not able to represent clients. They're only able to represent clients submitting immigration applications and representation at a tribunal such as the IRB. It's really important to double check your immigration consultant's authority and that they are licensed and that they are able to help you. So I highly encourage that if you do want to work with an immigration consultant, before you meet with them, go to the link and double check to make sure they're on the list through the CICC, which is our governing body. Unfortunately, there is a lot of, for lack of a better word, like corruption when it comes to immigration consultants. It's something that they're really cracking down on, which is good. It is something that they've changed through different education requirements and different licensing requirements now. But just as an overall statement, please double check to make sure that the immigration consultant is regulated by the CICC. Lastly, just to note, when you are working with someone, providing legal advice, what that means is getting into the specifics of your case and guiding you through the process. So the New Canadian Center can give great resources. They can point you in the right direction. They can let you know where you can find certain information. But when it comes to the specifics of your case, and an example of this is, what permanent residency pathway should you take? Should you apply for express entry? Should you apply to become a refugee? Those types of specific questions should be discussed with someone that is licensed and regulated, someone that's knowledgeable of the different pathways, and that can guide you through the process that meets your specific and unique case in those requirements. So that's the difference between legal advice and the guidance process that the New Canadian Center does, which is wonderful work. Lastly, if you want to go to the last slide there, if you do have any questions after this meeting, please feel free to book a free consultation with Erin. We are somewhat funneling all the questions and after follow-ups to Erin. She will help you better understand your case and what your specific needs are, and she can help you guide through the process. You can go to any other immigration consultant or lawyer, but this is just her contact information for her consultation.
Yeah, and if you can click on the link and it will take you directly to my inbox. So it'll go right on my calendar. Just wanted to make sure that if you sent any emails that they didn't get lost in the shuffle. And this way you're right on the calendar and we can have a quick little chat over the phone or Zoom, whatever you prefer, to talk about your unique situation, if that's something that you're interested in. But again, Rebecca will be helping me with those sorts of questions. And if you want to speak to anyone else, you can always look at the list that Rebecca provided for other immigration consultants in the area, or the Law Society Referral Service is also another great service for refugee and immigration lawyers.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like that's the end of sort of what we have prepared. We wanted to leave some time for questions because we figured there would be a lot of questions. So we're happy to take those now.
Yes, thank you, Erin and Rebecca. That's a great overview. Quick, but introducing the three main areas and a little bit of recommendations and good information about getting advice from people with the appropriate backgrounds. Thank you. We did want to leave a good amount of time for questions so that the discussion is directed to the people who are here tonight. Olena, I'm going to ask you to show yourself again, and we will we have some questions. There may be some questions in the chat. We will look at the chat, but if there's anyone in the room who would like to ask a question, it's hard to see everyone. So I guess we'll just ask you to unmute, introduce yourself, your first name maybe, and your question in English or in Ukrainian. And Olena, do you want to just go over that first before we open the floor?
Of course. Будь ласка, якщо у вас є питання, просто зніміть себе з мікрофону і оголосіть своє ім'я і запитайте українською чи англійською. Будь ласка, у нас є дуже багато часу залишилось, так що давайте будемо мати дискусію.
Доброго дня.
Доброго дня.
Мене чути?
Чути, так.
Мене звуть Михайло. Тобто, я правильно зрозумів, щоб отримати статус постійного жителя, у мене є варіант або експрес-ентрі, або податись на оці три варіанти отримання, там де треба оплатити такси. Там на слайдах вони були, але я не запам'ятав, як вони називаються.
Ви маєте на увазі на слайді, де експрес-ентрі, там були три таких моменти уточнення, так? Ви це маєте на увазі?
От постійне проживання, статус біженця. І там збір $570, обробка заявки 24 місяці, доступна юридична допомога Онтаріо, державні збори за подання документів.
Це оголосили різні напрямки, як ви можете, це залежить від вашої ситуації, так? Якщо ви хочете десь більш детальніше, мабуть, щоб вам розповіли про експрес-ентрі, я можу це перекласти і запитати. Чи вас цікавить інша програма, інший струм, який тут оголосили?
Не зовсім зрозуміло, як можна отримати статус. Тому я би хотів отримати консультацію по експрес-ентрі, конкретно по моїй ситуації. Та якщо не підходить ця програма, то які альтернативи? Як це можна зробити?
Давайте я зараз перекладу їм і будемо відповідати. Дякую, Михайло. All right, Erin and Rebecca, I'm going to translate for you. There's a question from Mikhailo. He is asking a little bit of more of a personal information, which is natural for everybody. If express entry per se doesn't work out as a way or as a path to permanent residency, what would you suggest would be the next go-to path for people? Let's put it like that.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it really depends on the specifics of his case. For example, education, work experience, maybe family members involved, if there's children involved. There's so many variables. It really depends on who we're speaking with.
Okay, I'm going to translate.
Okay.
Михайло, Ребека каже, що це, як я і казала, що це буде залежати від вашої персональної ситуації. Наприклад, яка у вас рівень освіти, чи у вас є сім'я, діти. Це все повинно...
Так, я зрозумів це.
Для цього я вам думаю, що найкращим способом для вас буде зв'язатися з дівчатами і запитати у них, як вони казали, безкоштовну консультацію отримати. Це те, що я би зробила. Так.
Ага, зрозуміло, дякую.
Дякую за питання.
Доброго дня.
Доброго дня, Денис.
Так, Dennis. Hello, my name is Dennis. I have some questions about my spouse and kids. For example, if I meet the requirements and I will get the PR, will it mean that they will automatically get this status too or not?
Sorry, can you repeat that? I just didn't hear a question.
Yeah, so for example, I meet the requirements for getting PR status according to express entry with Canadian experience. But I have a spouse, a wife, and 3 kids. When I will get the permanent residential status, will it mean that they will get it automatically or not?
Correct. So when you apply for express entry, you include your family. So your spouse and your children, there's questions regarding your immediate family. You would have to provide your marriage certificate and birth certificates as well, showing the relationship. But it's all one application, and then you all get permanent residency at the same time.
Okay, so the whole family will get it in the same time. Am I right?
Yes, yes.
And same for refugee as well. But on that, it's really important that if you have any family that you name them on the application, because you can't add family after the fact. So it is really important to name who you plan on having on your application at the very beginning.
Yeah. Same for express entry as well. You have to name everyone.
Oh, this is great. And one more question. As I see in the requirements, you need only to confirm your English level by IELTS and CELPIP. But right now we've passed an exam. It's called LINK, this official Canadian program of studying and assessment. Am I right or not? That to meet the requirements, I need to pass some additional exam. So link certificate will not work for this case.
Let me look this up. Give me 1 second.
Because this is official program that was paid by government, and they confirmed me that it will be legal for the immigration process. But right now, as I see, there are some problems with it.
Can I share my screen? Yeah.
Yeah.
Just give me 1 second. Okay. Can you see this list here? Language tests, express entry?
No, we see your mountain scene. We don't see
your
this.
desktop.
It looks beautiful wherever that is. Now I want to go there.
Yeah, this is great. I think after this we will all get the PR.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Okay, now
Rebecca, that's good.
at least it's an organized desktop, okay? Okay, so the language tests that they accept are listed here. So if what you took is one of these, then yes, it would be accepted. If not, no.
Oh my God! So it's this program link is absolutely unreasonable.
No. I'll put a link into the chat so you can see what I'm looking at. But it depends on the program. So again, like going back to the specifics of the case, express entry might have a different requirement than say a work permit or a study permit or like refugee status. Like it really depends on the specifics of the program. So if you are working with someone that's helping you submit this application, that specific program might have different requirements. But this link here is saying for express entry, no, that wouldn't work.
Okay. But on the site, in the description of CUAET program, the government make a note that in the future they will make some changes for Ukrainians, and it will be easier to get PR. Do you know about these changes? Maybe you have some such as called insider information.
So the Canadian government will sometimes announce that there are upcoming changes. So there could be an upcoming program, there could be a pathway specific for individuals.
Yep.
We've seen it in the past and we'll see it in the future. Unfortunately, we're not given any details or timelines. So what we always tell people is to not rely on what the Canadian government says might happen, because depending on your circumstances, it could, by the time it's implemented, could be years past when you need it to be implemented.
Okay.
So it's great that they're working on it and that they're saying that there might be something coming up. But what we like to do is work with the legislation and programs that are currently available, so that way you get your status as quickly as possible and you're not scrambling last minute.
I'm going to jump in now, Dennis. I think I'm just going to jump in. There's another question in the chat. And it says, would you go a little bit more in depth with requirements for express entry?
Yeah. Give me 1 second. I'm going to share my screen again. No mountains this time? No? Okay. Okay, so express entry, there are 3 different categories, as I explained earlier. So Canadian Experience Class, Federal Skilled Worker Program, and Federal Skilled Trades Program. Due to the group that I'm talking to today, I'm going to skip over the Canadian Experience Class because you need to have gained work experience within the last 3 years. And while that might be something that is eligible for everyone, I think it might be better to talk more about the Federal Skilled Worker Program. But before I do that, I'll give just a bit more of a detailed overview of express entry. So this link here, which I'll share in the chat afterwards, it provides the step-by-step process. So you find out if you're eligible first, you check your score, you get all your documents ready, your supporting documents, and then you submit what's called a express entry profile. This is a free profile online that you submit, and then once you submit it and you have a score, the Canadian government about every 2 weeks will release a bunch of invitations to apply to this pool of individuals that have express entry profiles. So if you receive an invitation to apply, then you apply for permanent residency. It's when you submit your applications, your forms, and your documents. And then that's when the clock starts, which I believe right now is about 17 months for processing. Now, even right here, it says we process most applications that have all supporting documents in 6 months or less. That's not the case right now. It is about 17 months. It is at least over a year. But that's the general process of express entry. So federal skilled worker program. There are different requirements of the three. So for the federal skilled worker program, there is I'm going to try and not get too detailed, but essentially they're looking at your past experience. So they look at your work experience, your language abilities, and your education. There is another point system for the federal skilled worker program. It's 100-point grid, and the current passing mark right now is 67 points. So your language skills, you can get up to 28 points. And then your education can be up to 25 points. Your work experience, you can get up to 15 points. And your age also accounts towards your points. And lastly, if you have arranged employment in Canada, you can get up to 10 points for that as well. And then your employer would have to be involved in that process. Sorry. And then lastly, I think this is the last one. Adaptability is a maximum of 10 points. So for example, if you have a spouse who has a high language test results, if you studied in Canada, past work experience in Canada, all those factors, my main point is that when it comes to express entry, all the factors of what essentially builds your resume, so work experience, education, those all contribute to and help you obtain permanent residency through express entry. Now, if you're an individual who does not have post-secondary education, who does not have work experience in Canada, who does not have work experience abroad, maybe you're a little bit older, because unfortunately, the younger you are with express entry, the more points you get. I'll go back up here really quickly. The more points you get when you're younger, and then as you get older, they go down. So all these factors contribute to if it's really a good program for you or not. You may be able to submit an express entry profile. You may be eligible, but maybe your points are low, and there's another program that actually makes more sense for you, like the humanitarian compassionate route or refugee status as well. Hopefully that answers your question. If you have any more questions, please ask away.
Yeah, I saw there's another question in the chat. Marissa, is that okay if I address that? Okay. Again, I'm going to see if I can share my screen. Hopefully you can see my background.
Could we just repeat the question first? Yeah.
Yeah,
I can read it.
Okay.
How soon can we apply for permanent residency? And if we have a disabled child, developmental delay, not capable of moving on his own, probably genetic, is there a chance to get permanent residency, or there's a guaranteed medical inadmissibility?
Yeah. So it really depends on the stream. I know, I'm sorry, it depends is like the lawyer's favorite term. But you know, if you're applying for humanitarian and compassionate grounds, then you could apply as soon as you get all of your paperwork together. If you're applying for express entry, you can, as soon as you meet all those requirements and have all of that paperwork together to put your express entry profile together, you can do that. And if you want to start a refugee claim, you just need to get in contact with a lawyer and start your basis of claim. So all those steps can be taken relatively quickly, depending on which stream that you want to go to. And to answer the medical inadmissibility, sorry, I forgot I had stockings up here. So Christmas stockings stuff. But for inadmissibility, there are 3 reasons that people, or that the government will deem someone medically inadmissible. So either it's a danger to the public, so, you know, some sort of respiratory disease or something that they think is highly contagious, that could be a danger to the public health or a danger to public safety, or it could be excessive demand on the health or social services. However, that's not just the end of the story. As you can see, there's some other considerations here. But there is also a mitigation plan. So if you are deemed to have a health condition that might cause excessive demand on Canada's health or social services, you can be invited to put together a mitigation plan. And this is by invitation only, but it allows you to come up with a plan like, I will pay for private health insurance to cover these costs for my medical condition, to offset any costs for the individual. However, just to note here, medical inadmissibility rules for excessive demand reasons don't apply to refugees and their dependents, protected persons, and certain people being sponsored by their families, such as dependent children, spouses, and common law partners. So hopefully that answers that question, and I will pop that into the chat as well.
Other questions? We're coming up at
Can I?
5 to 8. Yes.
I want to ask the question about our Ukrainian education. Is it, do we need to prove education to get PR points in PR status, or this education is good and we don't need to do anything with it?
Erin, do you want to answer that question or do you want me to?
If you want to go for it.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So now there might be some exceptions to the education requirements when it comes to individuals in the CUAET program and pathway. I'm not familiar with them, but there might be. But generally speaking, when you complete education outside of Canada, you need to do essentially like an assessment to convert whatever you learned or were granted outside of Canada to what it would have been inside of Canada. So say, for example, you completed 4 years of university in Ukraine, you would submit for an assessment, and then it would come out what that would equal to in Canada. Maybe it also equals a 4-year degree in Canada, but maybe it equals something bigger. Maybe it equals a 6-year, or maybe it's just a 2-year diploma. It really depends on the location, the school, the length of time, your grades. Like there's a lot of factors that can go into it. So this is something that you would definitely work with your immigration consultant or immigration lawyer to do an assessment and make sure that you have all the documentation needed to apply for permanent residency. But if you do want to learn more about the like conversion, a company that is used often and is essentially accredited to provide these assessments is called the World Education Services. So it's a WES. Again, depending on the program, they might want another type of assessment done. So it all depends. But that is one company that you could go to do this conversion. But maybe your application when you go to apply doesn't need an education assessment. It's not needed for everything. So in summary, I would say go to the the individual that's helping you, that's guiding you through the process and helping you pick the program that works best for you. And then they'll guide you through what you need and what you don't need. And thank you for putting the link in the chat. I appreciate that.
Okay, thank you.
We have two questions in the chat. I'll put them together. What are the drawbacks of the humanitarian compassionate pathway? Can anyone under CUAET apply? And the other question is, are people under the CUAET, the CUAET, considered protected persons? Maybe that's the first question. And the second one is the H&C pathway.
Okay. So the short of it, I do not think that people under the CUAET are considered protected persons right now, because that's a very, very specific designation. They're being protected by the government through this program, but that's not the same as that specific protected person designation, because in order to get that, you need to go through a refugee claim or be designated as a person in need of protection under Section 97 of the Act, which gets very complicated. So, but just in short, it's not a protected persons stream. It's just a temporary measure to provide protection to people through that program. The drawbacks of the humanitarian and compassionate grounds pathway, I would say that it's sort of the last resort when it comes to applications for some individuals. The other thing is that there's sometimes a 1-year bar. So say, for example, you applied for refugee status and you were not granted refugee status, you cannot apply for humanitarian and compassionate grounds application for a year after the final disposition of your refugee claim. So the way that agencies and refugee claims interact may have some drawbacks for you depending on which route you take. Hope that makes a little bit sense, but it's hard to say that there's drawbacks to one specific pathway because it will really depend on the individual person and what pathway works best for them. So one pathway may have some drawbacks, but it's actually the best path for one person because they have a certain situation versus another pathway. I hope that, did that answer about those questions? I hope so.
I'm trying to play devil's advocate here, just hearing all the questions coming in from different people running up to this session. I guess as a Ukrainian, let's say, who is settled here and trying to stay here, I would be looking for the fastest, most efficient way for me to definitely stay here. Because let's say I don't want to go back or I don't have a country to go back to. So people are looking for, and I know we didn't talk here about Atlantic or other provincial programs, but people are considering, if express entry doesn't work and it doesn't sound like it's a quick one, or the NOC codes is another story. And if a refugee is too complex because there's no return back home, and then humanitarian and compassionate, it's still not sure, like it has to be evaluated, then what is the advice in this case? And again, it depends on everybody's situation, but would in sort of this quick answer, if it would be easier for people to look at provincial programs that are attracting newcomers to come and settle there? Perhaps those are a lot, less processing times, easier criteria for them to apply to, but perhaps they have sort of like an anchor, you have to stay here for 2 years once you receive it. What is your advice, if there is an easy answer to this? If you were in the shoes of Ukrainians, how would you approach these all different streams of immigration, and where would you begin? How should you think?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I do think the best way to tackle it is to go to an immigration lawyer, an immigration consultant, and not just explain your story, but what are your goals? Are your goals to maintain your Ukrainian status of citizenship, or are you willing to follow the path of permanent residency into citizenship and maybe forego your Ukrainian citizenship? Is your goal to maybe not stay in Canada long term? Maybe you want to move to another country where you have more family or more support, and Canada really is just a temporary place for you right now. When it comes to children, like do you want your children to be raised in Canada, or is your goal to go back to Ukraine as soon as possible? And I think all those factors will help you determine which is the best pathway. So I know I'm kind of saying it depends, but if you look at what your goals are, the pathway will become clear. I think if you are willing to stay in Canada long term, you want to be here permanently, not just for the next 5 years, but obtain citizenship, I would say go the pathway that you can obtain citizenship as quickly as possible. If your goal is to go back to Ukraine, maybe just focus on temporary residency applications and don't worry so much about permanent residency. So I would encourage them to really look at what is your long-term plans and what do you think would be best for you and your family. I'm sorry if that doesn't really answer your question.
No, I think it's good answer to dig through, but let's hypothetically, as an add-on to that, majority again of people want to stay. They would like to remain and become Canadian citizens. So but what they see is permanent residency first and then Canadian citizens. Is that the way they should think about, and then search up the program that way?
Yes. So in order to obtain citizenship, you have to be a permanent resident first. And there's different requirements when it comes to a citizenship application. So when you are a permanent resident, in order to maintain permanent residency, and you reapply every 5 years, for as long as you're here, you have to reapply. There's a residency requirement, which is 2 years out of every 5 years. Now, if you want to apply for citizenship, it's then bumped up to 3 years out of the last 5 years from the date that you submit your application. Dates when you submit citizenship applications are really important because the clock starts specifically on those dates to 5 years back. So to answer your question, yes, you have, if citizenship is your goal, you first start at permanent residency, you obtain permanent residency, and then you move forward to obtaining the citizenship status by meeting the citizenship eligibility requirements.
Yep, that makes sense. Thanks, Rebecca.
You're welcome.
I'm conscious of time. I see a couple of questions in the chat that are follow up a little bit on what Rebecca just said, and also thinking maybe, Erin, if you wanted to jump in with some final comments. So the questions are, if the humanitarian program is the last resort, what would be the best program for older individuals? And I think the answer will be similar to what we have, but which pathway allows citizenship the fastest? So you can hear the kinds of questions people are looking for, clarity on which pathway they should choose. Perhaps if you could review again the overview, and maybe we'll do just a summary and wrap up the session that way. Erin and Rebecca. one of you. And I don't know if it's worth any interpretation, Elena, on any of this, or if you feel that people are comfortable in English.
I feel like people are comfortable in English at this point.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
So just to touch on which pathway allows citizenship the fastest, once you get permanent residence, it's the same process for applying for citizenship, no matter which pathway you took to get there. So essentially it would be whatever pathway allows you to get permanent residence the fastest will therefore allow you to get citizenship the fastest. There's no way to shortcut the amount of years that you need to live in Canada before you're eligible to apply for Canadian citizenship. It's just a waiting game. You have to fulfill those timelines before you can apply for citizenship. And humanitarian and compassionate grounds, I don't mean it as a last resort for everyone. I just mean for some people. So for example, if they had a criminal inadmissibility, there's no other way to come across it. That is their only resort. They're not eligible to apply for other streams. So for some individuals, that is literally the only stream that they will be able to go through. If they have a conviction in a different country or in Canada, that precludes them from applying for express entry or even refugee claims. Some criminal inadmissibility can make you ineligible to apply for refugee claims as well. So it really depends on the individual. For older retired individuals, the kinds of arguments that you would make for an older retired individual, I believe would kind of fall through that humanitarian and compassionate grounds application. That's where you would make arguments such as, they were displaced during a war. They were then brought to Canada on a temporary basis. They were at an age that they were already retiring and spent their savings to come to Canada and try to resettle. It's very difficult for them to then try and up and move to another country. It would be, a humanitarian and compassionate reason to allow this couple to stay in Canada to live out the rest of their life, given their age and their accessibility issues, language barriers, you name it. That's where you would bring in those sorts of arguments. So in that case, a humanitarian and compassionate ground application could potentially be the best pathway for them, especially if they don't necessarily have all of the points required to kind of get through the express entry option. So again, so sorry. I know it's the worst to hear that it really depends, but it really depends because it's each individual's life story and what skills, what life experiences they've had and how that can be crafted into a narrative to put forward in one of these applications. So express entry, you have the different point system. You're looking at different things like your age, your language, your work experience, your family, all of that sort of stuff to come up with this comprehensive ranking, they call it. And that's the express entry. Then you have humanitarian and compassionate grounds, which is a stream that allows you to sort of overcome any of those inadmissibilities and allows the government to take in those humanitarian and compassionate grounds, some things that they don't necessarily get to take into account when assessing express entry or even a refugee claim. And then you have the refugee claim, which is used to grant protection to people, especially in situations like this, that need protection from the government to be able to stay in Canada on a permanent basis. But again, it is a very intrusive process. The fact that you really need to go through what happened to you and why you specifically were affected by the war and why you specifically cannot return, and not as much on your language, skills, family background, more so on what the effects of the war has had on you and why you were unable to return home at this time. Cons each will be better suited to a different person, even though you may come from the same country and be experiencing the same war. It will affect everyone differently, and the best stream for you will really be fact dependent.
Thanks, Erin. Rebecca, any last words?
Yeah, just as last words, the Canadian immigration system is very confusing. It can come across as overwhelming. And there are so many different options and variables and decisions you have to make. So if you're feeling overwhelmed, I wouldn't be surprised. But know that people are there to help you. The New Canadian Center is there to help you. We're here to help you. And I encourage you to think about what are your goals. And what do you want from Canada? It does make a really big difference on what type of application you'll apply for, depending on your goals and what you want. So I encourage you to kind of consider that and to just be easy on yourself. It is an overwhelming, somewhat complex system to jump into. Erin and I have been studying the immigration laws for years, and sometimes we get overwhelmed. So it's okay, and we're here to help.
Okay, thank you. That's a great place to end our session for tonight. I would like to thank both our speakers, Erin and Rebecca, for their insights, their encouragement, their information and presentation. I'd like to thank Elena for interpretation and for also translating the slides, which was a big job. And also behind the scenes, Yvonne Lai, she's named New Canadian Center Tech, has been assisting with some of our technical and background work at this session today. I hope that you found the information useful. I hope that there was some nugget of new information for you to consider. We will, at New Canadian Center, look at providing future information sessions to assist you and others to try to make the decisions that are right for your family and for yourselves. So with that, I would like to wish you all a good evening. This presentation will be posted on the website, and we will include also the link to Erin's website as well, and her information and Rebecca's information for your knowledge. And again, thanks to our presenters tonight. We also do have other consultants and lawyers and others in the community who would be happy to help as well. So please don't hesitate to reach out to the New Canadian Center or to any of the speakers tonight. So thank you very much. Have a good evening, and we hope to see you again soon.
Thank you so much, guys. It was our pleasure to hear you. Thank you for all the advice and for your time.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Problem.
Okay, have a good evening.
You too.
Thank you.
And Anna, I saw that you had posted how much services cost. My initial call is free. And then it really depends on the stream and if you're eligible for legal aid, all of that sort of stuff, but happy to chat with you about that if you want to book in.
Yeah. Erin, do you have any office closer to Belleville?
I do everything online.
Ah,
So
it's online. Okay.
everything virtually. Yeah.
Yeah. So you will put in a chat your contact details, right?
Yeah, I'll put the link so you can book in a call with me because that's the easiest way to get a hold of me.
Yeah,
It's
okay,
impossible.
perfect.
Yeah, I got it. I can do it.
Okay, thanks.
There you go.
Mhm. Got it. Thank you so much, Rebecca.
Welcome.
Terrible at emails these days, like it's a graveyard in there.
Yeah. It's where messages go to die.
That's where my messages go to die. Rebecca knows.
Всім дякую, всім доброго вечора і дякую, що до нас приєднались. And thank you, Erin and Rebecca.
You're
Appreciate it.
welcome.
No problem.
Thank you.